Hello everyone, welcome to our discussion forum again. I'm Goh Meng Seng, I'm from the People's Power Party.
And I'm Kim Lian. I want to be asking Meng Seng about a topic that he is quite passionate about, and that is on checks and balances. Meng Seng, I read a statement in your party's website about the importance of having checks and balances in our system of governance. Can you explain what are these important concepts?
Well, first of all, my party was formed right after Mr. Lee Kuan Yew have passed away. And at that moment, I think the most concern of political players in the field is that will we continue to have a clean government and a functional ruling system? So at that point of time, I feel that there's too much power have been put onto certain people in the cabinet, the political appointees. So power corrupts. So we do not have a gatekeeper like Lee Kuan Yew, at least to actually manage his own pool of talents in governance. So at this moment, we wanted something to be institutionalized in the check and balances, especially the three branches of powers. There's the legislative, judiciary, and the executive.
And how should these three branches, how should they operate so that there is proper checks and balances?
Now, when we talk about checks and balances in Singapore context, normally people will only think about parliament, which is a legislative. They thought that we just vote more opposition parties members inside, then we have check and balance. But no, that is not how it works. Because you have to you have the institutions that need to be separated in independence. For example, appointment of judges, high court judges, should not be made by political appointees. It must be actually appointed by a group of professionals within their core peers to decide who have a credit or merits to be high court judges, instead of controlled by the cabinet.
And you are saying that in Singapore, the judges are appointed by the cabinet?
Yes, precisely so. And they do not have a systematic selection and transparent method of selection. For example, our Attorney General, which is appointed out of the blue, which is related to the Prime Minister. And that is not going to do well as a perception by people that this person in this position will be independent when it comes to a lot of cases which have conflict of interest.
But I thought under our system, the appointment has to be approved by the president.
Yes, but just like we have seen in Malaysian constitution also, that by right, the Agong or the president in our case will have the power to appointment, but subject to the cabinet advice, which is actually defies a logic of independence. So especially in the executive point of view, the civil servants, the top civil servants have been the appointment is not transparent at all, how it was done. So for example, important position like Temasek Holdings, the CEO and all that. Well, with due respect, the Prime Minister's wife, Ho Ching, might be clever enough, have the intelligence level to be that place, but on the perception-wise, on the political perception-wise, there's a huge potential of conflict of interest. And what makes it worse was there was no transparency on the pay, the salaries that she's getting out of a national sovereign wealth fund. And that is not going to do well for our political involvement.
I thought in Singapore, the pay of the chief executive of listed companies have to be disclosed. You're saying that that's not the case with Temasek Holdings.
Yes, that's not the case with Temasek Holdings.
So
and that is public money.
So the excuse could be they're not a listed company, and therefore they don't need to disclose the pay.
But Temasek Holdings is a recognized sovereign wealth fund, and it is equivalent to any stats board. and all state boards, the chiefs will be given a benchmark of pay, how much the top people will get. That's how it works in civil service. Why should Temasek Holdings be extraordinarily different from the governance? Although it's by book, it is registered as a private company, but it enjoys certain privilege.
Now, Meng Seng, recently we saw the general election in Malaysia, where a new party is elected to form the government, and the Prime Minister, Dr. Mahathir, strongly believes in the rule of law. He has also introduced some new practices to strengthen checks and balances in Malaysia. Can you explain what some of these new practices are?
Well, in the first place, I think he did a cleansing of the old administration. The Attorney General was changed, forcefully changed by him. The Corrupt Investigation Bureau chief was changed, and that is how he perceived, and the appointment of a certain personnel, which is accepted by the people, is very transparent. And for example, Thomas, which is being appointed as, although he's not a Malay, a Muslim Malay, but everybody accepted because of his credential.
Are you saying that the public approval would be an important criteria, but if some people appointed were very close to the new Prime Minister, would that meet your standard of checks and balances?
No, basically because independence must be instituted and be seen to be instituted. If it's too close to the person, I think people will have a misconception or perception, which is not helpful at all when it comes to the crunch of a certain lawsuit or case. So even if a person is very well grounded, right, but he's too close to the power that be, I think it is not very wise to appoint such person, because there's something called avoidance of conflict of interest. That means you do a preemption of being perceived there's a conflict of interest to the power that be. I think this is an important thing that we need to stress upon, whether it is from appointment of a certain top civil servant or even within administration.
Now, I do remember reading earlier that Dr. Mahathir wanted some appointment to go through Parliament so that Parliament can discuss whether the person should be appointed. And he mentioned certain key positions. And I thought the Attorney General would be one of those. But it seems to be that this appointment is bypassing Parliament. So I don't know whether it's a matter of because of urgency or whatever, or maybe Parliament is not so appropriate. So do you think the earlier concept of appointing certain people by Parliament would still be applicable?
It is applicable. A lot of places practice such appointment system. For example, the US Congress, they actually go through the Congress and the Senate to appoint certain important personnel. The federal judges, the top Supreme Federal judges, the Attorney General as well. I think it is a good practice. But having said that, I think in Malaysia there's a concept that certain important posts must go to a certain race. I think that is a consideration that Mahathir must have in mind when he actually skipped that process. Because whether we like it or not, within the parliament in Malaysia is still dominated by a lot of Malays, MPs. So he might be afraid that his concept of merits might not be accepted because it's always been skewed towards a certain race.
Now, what about coming back to Singapore? If we are going to have checks and balances, how should these organizations be independent of the government? For example, the Corrupt Practices Bureau, should it be independent of the government? And how should the head be appointed? What about the election department? Should it be independent of the Prime Minister? And then what about the Attorney General? So can you give a comment on some of these three key components?
First of all, we are talking about appointment of key personnel in this organization. We have actually the PSC, the Public Service Council. They actually do recruitment, human resource management for the civil service. All appointments should come from there. They are professional in looking for talents that suits a certain position, and political appointees should not meddle with it. There's no reasons for any prime minister, even prime minister, should meddle with such appointment for civil servants, right? As for the CPIB election department, right, even the Auditor General, they should come directly under the president, because the president is an elected president with no executive power. There's very few conflict of interest involved because it doesn't run the system itself. So he would be a very good figurehead that get these institutions under his guard, because he have to maintain the cleanliness of the system.
But the president already has this power to approve the appointment. Are you saying that the president should be initiating who are to be appointed? But that does require a lot of work. Huh?
No, in our case right now, although the president have a power to appointment, but subject to the cabinet advice, that should be transferred to the PSC, the professional bodies that govern the human resource management of the civil servant, instead of a cabinet. I think that's the point that we have to actually move away from. You know?
Now, I want to share an interesting practice in Indonesia. I read about this in the newspaper. I visit Indonesia quite often. There was the need to appoint members of their corruption bureau. I think they call it the KPK, the Corruption Bureau. And because it is very important to appoint the right people, the president of Indonesia did not submit the names himself. He actually appointed a selection committee. And then the selection committee then make an announcement to the public at large. Who do you want to recommend to be appointed in this KPK? And then, of course, the civil society, the public at large, submit many names of people they consider to be very suitable, high integrity. And then the selection committee then meet to consider these public nominations. And their final selection went to the president. And the whole process is very transparent. And to a large extent, I thought they did get a good balance of members of the KPK using this process. And what I wanted to mention specifically is there is transparency about the whole process, and there's an opportunity for the public to see that the nominees, why they were being selected. May I have a comment on this kind of practice?
I think this is a good system to start with, but bearing in mind that in Indonesia, the president have executive power. He's not just a figurehead, unlike ours. If we actually use the same system and put under our president, I think it's perfect. It's going to be perfect because he doesn't have any conflict of interest to avoid in such appointment. And especially for the Corrupt Practice Investigation Bureau, I think it is important not to have people that you are supposed to check on to appoint you. I think that is a very delicate
you are suggesting that one of the biggest risks is that the Prime Minister himself might be the corrupt party.
Yeah.
Of course, we've seen that happen in another
Malaysia.
country,
Yeah,
right?
you know, in Malaysia,
Okay,
now that we know a lot of hanky-panky things are starting to be dug out, and that is precisely why we should separate the appointment of such important things from the executive office, you know.
I just want to bring the concept a little bit further, whether the, for example, the election commission, whether the people appointed there could also be, through this process used in Indonesia, where the public can recommend highly respected persons who are independent and seen to be of high integrity to be heading the election commission, and even appointing the Attorney General, whether such a practice might be practical. Although you did suggest that maybe judges and perhaps the Attorney General could be appointed through consultation with the legal profession.
Yes, I think that for something specialized like the Attorney General, you need specific understanding and knowledge to be in that position. And I believe those peers, those lawyers and judges in a legal profession would be better off in making judgment on who are more suitable, instead of laymen like us. We do not know more about them.
Well, but in practice, I think even though you might invite nomination from the public, that in practice it is the profession that will be submitting a nomination, because the general public probably will find that it is beyond them.
Yes.
So that process seems to be quite okay.
Yes.
Because there could be several knowledgeable groups who might be submitting their nomination.
Yes. But coming back to the election department, I think election department, especially the appointment, is very important. There's a huge conflict of interest, whereby the ruling party appointing somebody to run the election department will have a huge advantage, especially in withdrawing boundaries and all that, which is a perception again that given to a lot of people that it is unfair. And that perception is not very helpful to the ruling party itself, because it is actually detrimental to their legitimacy as a ruling party when it is not seen to be done fairly.
I want to make one more point about civil servants. I read recently that Dr. Mahathir gives some code of ethics to civil servants, that they should not be members of a party, they should be totally impartial. But in Singapore, we do have a practice where the civil servants are appointed into a certain party and then they become elected into that party.
Yes.
Yeah? So I wonder whether how to avoid that perception that the civil service is tied into the ruling party. Yeah?
Well, we have a serious problem. I think Malaysia used to have such serious problem because of the dominance of the ruling party for so many decades. They are enrooted in every aspect of the organs of the country. But I just want to say that what happened in Malaysia can happen anywhere in the world. And what we are witnessing is some of the civil servants, the top civil servants, who are perceived to be corrupt, which is biased and all that, they will take the hit. And it is a good lesson to everyone in the civil service that you do not actually help a corrupt government to prosper. Else, the things that you are going to get back is pretty bad, you know. And it is not only affect the individuals, it affects the whole country as a whole. The trust of the system will be eroded, and that foreign investors will think twice when they want to come in.
Okay, Meng Seng, can I ask you to summarize your key points? What do you think are the most important principles of checks and balances in the government?
Okay. We do not believe that only having more opposition parties members in parliament will solve the checks and balances issue. Checks and balances have to be to be effected to the different institutions, the organs of the state. And this will start from the appointment of key appointment holders in the different organs. High Court judges, Election Department, CPIB, right? Even the Auditor General, Attorney General, and these are all key personnel should not be meddled with by the political appointees. And it's important that it must be seen to be just and free from political interference. It's not helpful to have people who are so closely related to the power that be it the Prime Minister or the ministers in the cabinet, to be appointed into these key positions. Right? That is the cruise of a good check and balance systems.
Thank you for sharing your views.